Good afternoon. I'm Cheryl Oldham, and I am the Senior Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, overseeing the work of the Center for Education and Workforce. And I'm thrilled to be here with you all today to facilitate this critically important discussion. This issue of the role of women in caregiving and the impact it has on their lives, their work, the decisions they make about their careers and their families is one that's been around for decades. But this year is obviously extraordinary, and we're seeing a disproportionate impact on women, as we've talked about throughout the day. At the Chamber Foundation, we conducted a number of surveys over the past year to better understand the issue of childcare in particular and the impact of the pandemic on parents, employers, and providers. We learned so much that is informing our work going forward, particularly as it relates to providing employers the tools to support working parents. And I wanted to just share a couple of stark data points from that research that I think sets up this conversation we're about to have. In June, close to 1 in 4 parents were unsure whether they would return to work at all. By fall, that number had dropped significantly for men, down to 6%, but for women, it was still close to 1 in 5. The primary reason given, childcare concerns. And even for women who plan to return to work, their return is happening at a much slower rate than men. And by October, 77% of men had already returned to work compared to just over half of women. So I'm really grateful to dig in with this distinguished panel of business leaders to understand how their companies are dealing with this crisis, reimagining care and creating an enabling environment for employees that supports their current needs. We're joined today by Andrew Hedgpeth, the Vice President of Human Resources at CoxHealth, Brandi Marsh, the Vice President of Human Resources, Diverse Workforce Solutions at Johnson & Johnson, and Bobbi Wells, the Vice President of Safety and Airworthiness at FedEx Express. Thank you all for being here with me today and with this great crowd. I wanted to start with maybe just kind of a broader question about COVID-19 and the pandemic. And as we've all been talking about, it's hitting working women hard as they often bear more responsibility for household work, childcare, elder care. From your vantage point, what has been the toll on working women and families? Andy, can we start with you?
I would be happy to. I think I can approach this, especially from the healthcare perspective. We have 13,000 employees across our enterprise, and we're very proud that we're 80% female. And I think that you certainly set it up nicely, Cheryl. There's a major issue here. And, very early on, we saw the emotional toll that this was taking primarily on our healthcare providers in this organization. We come from a very blue collar area of the country, and predominantly the women in healthcare are the bread earners for their family. And they're faced very quickly with this very stark decision of staying at work and taking care of this tremendous patient population that was hitting us, and the guilt and angst they felt about not being there for their colleagues and having to be home trying to take care of everything they had to deal with whenever they got off work, which is equally challenging. And I saw this in our response. In addition to our CEO, the 3 individuals who led our incident command are female, and one of whom became a grandmother in the middle of the pandemic. Another became pregnant with her second child. The third is my wife, who has 3 kids under the age of 12. And I witnessed her go 46 straight days before she took her first day off. And the emotional toll that takes on a family is pronounced. And I think now, as we're hopefully over the worst part of this pandemic, we're starting to see that these women who've walled themselves off from feeling the impact of all the death and dying are now starting to feel, and they're recognizing they've got kids who have missed critical learning windows and may not read, and just trying to put their lives back together. It's an especially pronounced toll.
Thank you so much for that, Andy. I love the focus on the mental health. It really is, I think, something that we all need to really be thinking about. Brandi, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I absolutely agree with Andy. So at Johnson & Johnson, naturally, healthcare and the focus on the whole employee is something that we value and has been a part of our fabric with our credo and just our company culture in general. And absolutely, for working women, there has been just an upending, I would say, of whatever balance we had been able to identify or create for ourselves pre-pandemic. And so we've only seen that, I would say, become more challenging with all of these multiple roles that we play. I'm happy to say that as Johnson & Johnson, we have not seen any significant change in our retention across the board. But the juggling of the many roles and all of it under one roof is still a stark reality. And it's something that, I personally deal with. I'm still, trying to juggle these many roles. I also have 3 children and, you look up and all of a sudden the support structures that you had built around you are no longer there. And so you find yourself trying to honestly redesign your entire daily routine in a way that now makes sense in a world where you can't even really anticipate the next 24 hours, much less the next, 2, 3, 4 months. I remember, just thinking back before the pandemic, it sounds silly, but one of my most dreaded questions of the day was what was for dinner. And here I found myself hearing that question 3 times a day at every meal. And, one of the early conversations I had with my manager, maybe it was a month or 2 into the pandemic, it was just a one-on-one, and he, started very, casually with, how are you doing? And I remember saying to him, well, it depends on who you're asking. Is it Brandi, the head of diverse workforce solutions? Is it Brandi, the teacher? Is it Brandi, the custodian, or Brandi, the cafeteria lady? And we laughed at it, right? But it really did open the door for us to have a very transparent conversation around how my world has changed and the impact of that on me. And I think it was a very momentous event for us, right? And it was just a very human moment where the work was pushed aside and there was an opportunity to acknowledge me as an individual and sort of the impact and the change. So the stress is there. The uncertainty of being able to get it all done is still very real. But I will say, as I look at my own experience, as I talk to colleagues, as I talk to friends, there are some bright spots, I think, that have also come out of this, right? I feel as though I've seen more compassion. I think there is, again, a deepening in the understanding of individuals and their personal situations. I've gotten closer to my children and how they learn, and I feel like I can be a better support and a better advocate for them. But this is absolutely a journey, and it continues to evolve. And so I think that there are definitely elements that we still have to work through to help women in this time.
Thank you for that. Boy, I see you. I think you hit everything that every one of us who's got kids at home is feeling. Bobbi, what have you seen, and what have you seen at FedEx Express?
Thanks, Cheryl. I agree with what Brandi and Andy both said. At FedEx, we have a foundation of a people-first philosophy. So that really helped us going into the pandemic. We put our people first in consideration, and that means that we orient our approach with care in mind. We have actually, as one of our policies, the company expects us to be kind to one another. And so the way I talk about it is that the difference between nice and kind is that nice is what you tell somebody when you answer a question so that they'll just go away and you don't want to hurt their feelings. And kindness is you're going to tell somebody what you think they need to hear in order for them to be better, in order for them to impact them and help them in a way, even if it's a difficult conversation for both you and for them to hear. So that foundation of kindness is linked to caring, and caring is integral to what we do. And it helped us pivot very quickly at the beginning of the crisis to ensure that our employees had access to information, which was so incredibly important because things were changing so swiftly. We immediately secured supplies, both sanitizer like everyone did, masks as soon as they were available. And And we were both fortunate and challenged in the fact that the demand for our business actually increased through the pandemic because of the need to deliver critical healthcare equipment and supplies. Now, that means that people need to come to work. Our pilots, our aircraft mechanics, the people who work on the ramp at the airports, they need to show up in order for us to be able to load our packages and get them on their way so they can be delivered. You have to be able to listen to employees. And so I think that's a fairly significant element that we can all use going forward. It's not just a matter of assuming what employees need, but asking what they need, finding out where they are now and what they need in order to be successful, both at home and at work. You've heard throughout the day the impact on mental. There's an emotional impact as well. Because for the people who aren't coming to the work, the office workers who are working from home, they miss the connection that they had before with partners at work, and there's an impact associated with that. So the flexibility we provided to employees was really important if they could work from home, but you have to balance that with the potential loss of innovation and the potential loss of collaboration, which just doesn't happen naturally on Zoom. So fortunately, I think the foundation of our culture really helped us through this crisis, and it helped point the way for our continued success going forward.
Thank you for that. You made this comment about listening to employees, and I referenced some survey work we did earlier this year, and as it relates to this issue of childcare, at least we found that it was something like 95% of all employers surveyed felt like they understood what their employees' situation was in terms of their current childcare. And I just doubt that there's any way that number was that high pre-pandemic. So I just found that really fascinating, and some maybe, tiny silver linings to come out of this, major crisis. I'd love to shift now to, you started on this path, Bobbi, by telling us some of the things that FedEx Express did. Andy, could you talk about what you all did at Cox to really support your working parents, both with school-age children and childcare issues?
Sure. Yeah. So pre-pandemic, we actually ran one of the state's largest non-public school run accredited childcare centers. We have 3 different locations. We've got 500 kids in our licensure, and we routinely run that with, unfortunately, a fairly lengthy wait list of people wanting to access our services. So we already were doing some of that, but in the fall, I can remember we were sitting in an incident command meeting for the health system, and I received a text from our CEO letting us know that the area's largest school district, with about 20,000 students, would be doing this hybrid model of going back to class, where they essentially split the grades in half. And so Monday, Tuesday, half the grade would be seated. Wednesday would be all virtual, and then Thursday, Friday would be for the other half. And immediately panic set in for me, because I'm trying to figure out how we're going to staff during a heightened crisis. And my heart immediately went out to the many parents who are going to be faced with this arduous decision of, do I stay in the workplace and help you fight this, or do I go part-time so that I could make sure my kids can learn? And so immediately we began talking about an idea to create a day school. And from that moment at 12 o'clock when we received that until 4 o'clock, at 4 o'clock p.m. that day, we sent out a notice to our employees we would be doing something. And we wanted to find out interest level in a seated program. And our employees have trust in us, and I appreciate that. And we made good on it. And 3 weeks from that date, school was set to begin. And I'm very proud to say that we created that program. It became a 4th location for us, and it was for grades K through 6. And we set it up, and we had 250 plus kids attending. And along the way, we partnered with 3 of our 4 colleges, universities in Southwest Missouri, and they provided their tutors, their student teachers, who also were struggling to try to find their hours so they could become teachers the following year. And we had this special focus on behavioral health. These kids were very well adjusted relative to their peers. But we wanted to make sure that we had behavioral health residents who also rounded on them and got to know them in the center. But we could provide updates to the parents. And I think, that was an awesome rally for this organization. And, we wanted to make sure that those employees weren't faced with that cognitive dissonance of what they were supposed to do. And it sort of became this rallying cry for the organization. And it went remarkably well. We're still doing it, although some of the district has returned to fully seated. I think the teachers indicated that our students in our program were better situated than the majority who were at home. And so that was a way that we could rise to the situation. And hopefully, I think one of the things that'll be a hallmark for my career whenever I hang it up to look back on.
That's amazing and extraordinary. I'd love to. Do you have a cost associated with something like that? Was it, obviously it wasn't cost prohibitive. You did it.
Yeah, we did it for $30 a week, which was a nominal fee. We partnered with a lot of local vendors, and we have great support in Southwest Missouri for our health system, and they all chipped in and helped cover. The big dairy distributor, for example, provided milk for the kids, and Coke was a big partner for us of being able to provide other supplements, and everybody just kind of pitched in. And then our employees also asked if they could donate. So we have an employee crisis fund, and we created a separate heroes fund specifically for COVID. And a lot of the employees gave their money to be able to help keep each other going. And I think it was this awesome coming together of community.
What an amazing story of partnership across a lot of stakeholders. Brandi, what about Johnson & Johnson? Can you share a little bit about what you all have been doing?
Yeah, definitely. I'll call out two things specifically, but again, it's long been a part of Johnson & Johnson's goals, right? To look again at the whole employee, so that physical, mental, and emotional. And we have a ton of programs that we have offered for many years. We continue to look at how to enhance or revamp that as we move forward. But, one of the things that I think was really innovative for us in this space was, and I mean for us, just because as a large company, sometimes it takes a while to steer the ship and turn it around. But I think, the ability to sort of act so quickly, being able to really be, I would say, agile and flexible and make decisions in sort of this shorter time frame to be able to get things done. And one of the ways has been with a lot of our programs and offerings. So being able to pivot and switch and have those become virtual. And that's everything from exercise programs that we would normally be having on site in our fitness facilities to, executive or senior leader development programming, right? So continuing to keep a focus on advancing our leaders and developing them, et cetera. Two things, and this kind of goes back, one to a point that you made, Bobbi, and one to you, Cheryl, but communication during this time frame was critically important. I think one, just in terms of connection and being able to keep people in contact and feel that they weren't alone in this. And then two, to make sure that people had the right information. So during this time frame, we actually developed two new newsletters. One that was really focused on leaders in our organization, which provided them with advanced knowledge of changes or policy shifts, really ensure that they had the proper messaging, that they could be prepared and be able to hold the right conversations with their teams when broader announcements came out. But then also one, which was our health newsletter, which was to all employees. And it was really, they could get everything they needed in one easy, one stop, easy to read, information for both them and their families. It went out on a weekly basis, and it was really just, I think, a great touch point that people began to look forward to understand any updates about returning to the workplace, even updates or news around what was going on outside of the company, right? So changes that were happening across the globe. The second sort of best practice that I would share, and this is about being able to listen to your employees and understand where they're at, what their concerns are, and not sort of making assumptions along the way. But we also developed our employee sentiment survey, which was sent out to a random sampling of employees. It was sent out on a weekly basis. It covered everything from engagement to organizational support, the ability to find and access and awareness of different tools or resources that were available to employees. And, it really has helped us to uncover how our employees were feeling, what they needed, in all honesty, how comfortable they were as we were beginning to phase back into the workforce. What were some of the safety measures that would make them feel more comfortable about returning to the workforce? And, like many other companies, we had before this annual employee surveys that, measured engagement, and people would put together these huge action plans. And this was really much more agile than that. Again, the frequency of doing it on a weekly basis, it really allowed us to segment our population. So we just got the most recent feedback or data and found that when we look at women, more of them are interested in remaining remote, actually, as things start to open up more. And when we think about types of jobs or flexible, possibilities or models, more of the women in our workforce are most interested in exploring part-time or job share opportunities. So it's being able to use those insights to really determine then how do we adjust, whether it's policies or think about our models, and look differently at how we think about our future.
Thank you for that. I'd love to hear when we get to maybe after Bobbi, have a question about sort of future looking. I would love to hear what you all think about that tool going forward. Bobbi, are there other best practices or things that you all have really begun to put in place amidst this pandemic to support your workforce?
Sure. So I'll talk about some things that are specific to the airline, and these aren't new. These are things that we've had in place, but I think it shows a particular strength that aviation has. We fly at FedEx. We fly to 220 countries around the world. We have nearly 400 large aircraft. And you can imagine pilots going all over the world, and then many of them coming back home here in the U.S. with all the changing regulations in all those destinations, the flexibility and the shifts that were happening. It was really important. Brandi touched on this. It was really important for us to have a very, very close tie to the pulse of the shifts that were happening at those destinations, and then to turn around and communicate that effectively to our pilots. It helped with their mental well-being and their assurance when they would talk to their families about their safety and their health as they returned home. So that kind of reciprocal or that positive cycle that allowed us to measure what was happening at all those destinations and then turn around and communicate it in a way that answered the questions so that our pilots could be effective and be focused on their job. That's something that aviation does really well, actually. So we were just further exercising a pretty strong muscle we have. On top of that, we have a process not only where we do an annual cultural survey with our employees, which is happening very soon here. So we'll be able to assess the culture and the impact to all of our employees and compare it to previous years. But we also, within aviation, have several employee feedback loop mechanisms where pilots can enter in requests or questions or issues. And so it provides us that report. It's either a reporting feature, it can be a question, a way for them to ask questions systematically. And then what it allows us to do as a company is gather all those questions together, assess trends, and be able to determine where there are opportunities for us to shift or opportunities for us to address a gap or correct a misunderstanding that might exist. So I think those are a bit unique compared to Andy and Brandi's approaches. And it shows ways that maybe other industries could make use of those mechanisms in order to, again, provide that assurance to employees so that they can in turn provide some comfort to their families.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like a very sort of common thread here throughout is this sort of unprecedented level of understanding of employee needs and then responsiveness as a result. So maybe we can end with the last question kind of about the future. And so is it, what do you think about some of these tools you've put in place? going forward or other things? How are you all thinking about the future? Brandi, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think the future is it's still there's so much that we have learned. I think as Johnson & Johnson as a company, I think as a society over the last year. But I do also believe that there are still some impacts that we have yet to experience and probably truly understand their effects on the workplace, right? So again, I'm really proud of how quickly we were able to have that agility and that adaptability and scale things up at a pace that I have not experienced in my 20 years at J&J, right? So I think, we are continuing to have these conversations around how can we maintain that piece and pull it through. Absolutely our sentiment survey, and we have, in the last year that we've been using that, we have altered the questions a bit so that we're able to also start to take a pulse on some new things. So as the workplace environment evolves and changes, to give us some more insights on that. But to your point, really leading with probably more of an employee-centric approach than we have in the past. And another thing for us, and I think specifically relevant to the topic that we have today, is we continue to look for the best ways to build on our diverse and inclusive culture and workforce. So with that, we have, as many of these other companies do as well, really detailed and really well thought out DE&I plans. But one program in particular that I would highlight is our Reignite program, which is, we call it a returnship. And it really focuses on attracting talented women who have, backgrounds in STEM-related fields or disciplines, and have chosen, or for whatever reasons, have taken a 2-year or longer career break. And how do we bring them back into the workforce? And it's a 4-month, again, returnship. We bring them in to specific roles, and we offer them a broad set of support. So there's onboarding, there is an assigned mentor, there's a technical peer, all the resources that we think can be helpful in having them come back and transition successfully into the workforce. And, so again, when I think about the pandemic, I think there are bright spots. And so where there may be, impacts that have forced women to look at career differently or think differently about work, we look at a program like Reignite at Johnson & Johnson and think that that's a way to help women transition back into the workforce when they're ready. So that's something, and programs like that are things I think we'll continue to explore as we go into the future.
That's great. Thanks, Brandi. Bobbi, what about you all?
We have at FedEx an approach to aviation safety that is based in the foundation of systems thinking. So I think that understanding of the system, because every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So whatever result we get out of the system, if we want to change the result, we have to change the aspects of the system. And the challenge with systems are that they're very complicated. There are lots of owners who have a little slice of it, which means there's no overall owner. It means that you have to come together and have an honest and transparent discussion about where there's opportunities to shift and make changes for the future. So I think what we've learned is that none of us live in a vacuum. We've found that the dependencies we have and the connections that we have around the world with one another, within our organizations and across industries, is critically important. And how we leverage that going forward, how we take a leadership role in improving it with a higher level of understanding that Brandi talked about, is where we're oriented at FedEx.
Thank you. Andy, I guess you're going to be our last speaker for today, for this panel. What about you guys? Do you think you'll retain some of these programs going forward?
I do. I think out of every crisis, there's a good opportunity that we can learn, and I think Brandi and Bobbi covered that quite nicely. We know that from a healthcare piece, that people, oftentimes our best clinical people are people who experience something growing up, sudden loss, extreme illness, maybe their own, maybe of a family member. And there's something that gets them into that higher calling. And we now have tens of millions of people who have been impacted profoundly in a negative way. And it is a huge opportunity for us to, in the coming years, entice them into careers that give them opportunity to succeed and grow and leverage their talents. And we've seen that demonstrated over the last year. And I'm actually really bullish on the future for that reason. I think we will be in a great spot. I think we need to continue to champion healthcare. I think we need to champion childcare. I think we need to champion everything necessary to give women an opportunity to succeed. And I think you've done a nice job today with your panelists. They've done a really nice job representing.
Well, thank you so much, and cannot thank you all enough. Brandi, Bobbi, Andy, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us today. Thank you.